having a super fantastic sparkling day. Welcome to Porchlight Letters podcast number 2388. How do I understand historical context around my ancestors' lives? This is a very interesting question. So context turns facts into lived experiences. You get all the facts and the facts being the dates, the when, the where, the dates with the where, like birth dates, where and when they were born, marriages, who did they get married to, what date did they get married on, where did they get married, deaths, death certificates and stuff, which show you when they died, how they what they died from, how they died, and it might have their parental information in there as well, along with their birth date and some other records too. So these are just facts. And then you get the immigration things that you can see too, where you see them boarding a ship in one country to leave for another country, or you see them arriving in another country based on where they've come from. You see that they may have had military service. You could see that. So there's all these different facts that you've got. They are just facts. There is no context to go with them to bring them alive for you. And basically adding context to some of these facts brings your ancestors alive. Even if you go and walk in their footsteps in the streets of the places that they used to live, see the houses they grew up in, the schools that they went to, the farms that they worked on, or areas where they worked, it's putting you in their footsteps, and it actually and history suddenly becomes alive for you. So let's have a look through some of these things. We've got some key points to go through. Local events influence personal decisions. Major local events often sit quietly behind personal choices. War, economic recessions, epidemics, political changes all shape how families lived and moved. For example, a sudden migration that looks random in records may align perfectly with a factory closure, a land shortage, or military conflict in that area. When you study what was happening locally at the time, decisions that once seemed mysterious suddenly begin to make a little more sense. Ancestors were responding to pressures and opportunities just as we do today. Social norms shape behavior. Every generation lives with social expectations that influence daily lives. Marriage age, family size, gender roles, education opportunities all reflect the values of the time. For instance, an ancestor marrying at 16 might feel shocking by modern standards. Yes, it would. Yet it may have been completely typical in their community and the time they were living in. Understanding these norms prevents us from judging the past through modern assumptions. It allows us to see behavior as culturally shaped rather than usual. So like we said, the young brides, 16, they were getting married at the age of 16. If they turned 18, 19, 20, they were considered old maids if they weren't married by the time they were, 18, 19, 20. And heaven forbid if they went beyond the age of 20, then they were spinsters. And today a spinster is an older woman who is maybe 60 and above. Back in those days, a spinster was anybody over 20, unmarried. So think about the times, and this is what was normal back then. Today, a 16-year-old getting married, most people would be up in arms about that. So think about so you have to put things into context. What was going on at the time? What was their social norms back then? What was the local events that may have influenced their decisions? You also have economic forces that guide opportunities. Economic conditions strongly influence where people live and what work they pursue. Industrial growth, agricultural decline, or the discovery of natural resources can attract entire communities. A move from a rural village, sorry, that's a word I always stumble over, to a growing city often signals the search for employment. For example, the opening of a railway or factory might explain why multiple families relocated at the same time. When you map economic trends, you begin to see your ancestors as participants in wider social shifts. Regional history reveals patterns. Every region carries its own historical rhythm. Settlement patterns, transportation routes, and cultural influence create predictable movements. A neighborhood that gradually fills with families from the same homeland may signal chain migration, where early settlers encouraged relatives to follow. Observing how communities developed over time helps explain repeated addresses, clustered surnames, and shared occupations. Regional history provides the background that turns isolated records into connected patterns. Whew. Are you starting to get a grasp of it now? Don't worry, we've got some practical stuff for you to do too. Context humanizes records. Records alone can feel cold and mechanical. Dates and locations list what happened, but not how it felt. Context adds emotional dimension. Knowing that an ancestor lived through a famine, an economic depression, or a social upheaval transforms a simple census entry into a story of resilience. A line in a ledger that becomes a life lived under real pressure and hopes. Context restores humanity in what might otherwise remain abstract information. And why does all of this matter? Context prevents misinterpretation. Without it, we risk misunderstanding choices and projecting modern expectations onto past lives. When you look at your relatives' lives, you have to find out what was it like for them to live in that time. What was going on? This is where newspapers come in handy for the stories that were going on. What was on the, if you find them mentioned in a newspaper, what was on the front page of that newspaper? If you find their obituary, what was going on when they died? Maybe they died from something that was an epidemic that was going on. Unless you look at the papers, you're not going to know these things. And looking through the newspapers tells you what the economic time was like as well. Look at the commercials that they have there. What are they selling? And you will find things like dirt cheap. You'll look at that and they go, they only paid $1 a tire for their car. Excuse me. And now we're paying like, what, $100 per tire per car, per tire for a car. Look at what the time was like back then. $1 was a lot of money back then. But today, $100 to some people is a lot of money. So your practical takeaway is research the world around your ancestors. Go back, pick an ancestor, go back in time and find as much information as you can about what was going on from when they were born to when they got married to when they died. What were the major stories that were going on at that time? What was the political climate like? What was the religious climate like? Did they move because of religious persecution or political conflicts, wars, all of this? Go and look. What was the time like? What did they do? Were they wealthy, considered wealthy? Were they considered poor? Were they somewhere in between? Find these things out. And if you need help contextualizing history, send us a private message and let's get set up on a 30-minute, no obligation, free discovery call and get you understanding more about what was going on at the time when your ancestors were living in a certain place. And our closing thought today is stories live inside their time. And with that, we are out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening, and we will catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. He konera.